Journalists, on the other hand, shouldn't have what you called a glass jaw when it comes to some of these investigations, citing the First Amendment and threats to the First Amendment.
Well, the First Amendment is a critically important part of the Constitution. It is not unconditional.
There are very few voices left in American media that carry the kind of weight that makes an entire industry stop and pay attention. Tom Brokaw is one of those voices. At 86 years old, the man who spent decades as one of the most trusted faces in broadcast journalism has lived long enough to watch the world he helped build transform into something almost unrecognizable. He has seen empires rise and fall, watched the Berlin Wall come down in real time, reported from the depths of some of the darkest moments in modern history, and still managed to come home and sit at a dinner table like a normal human being. That is no small thing. And now, from the quiet remove of a life well lived, Tom Brokaw has finally decided to say out loud what many in the industry have been whispering for years, that Savannah Guthrie is something genuinely extraordinary. To understand why this moment matters, you have to understand who Tom Brokaw actually is and what it means when a man like him decides to speak. Tom was not the kind of anchor who gave out compliments like they were party favors. He came from a generation of journalists who believed that the highest form of professional respect was simply letting good work speak for itself. You earned your place in that world through relentless dedication, through showing up when things were hard, through getting the story right even when getting it right was inconvenient or uncomfortable. Praise, in that culture, was a rare currency. So when Tom Brokaw opens his mouth at 86 to acknowledge what Savannah Guthrie has built and become, you listen. Because it is not something he does lightly, and it is not something he has done often. Tom grew up in Yankton, South Dakota, in a world that felt a million miles from the gleaming studios of Rockefeller Plaza. He was a prairie kid with a voice that seemed to have been engineered specifically for the purpose of delivering important information to large groups of people. From the beginning, there was something about him that suggested he was built for bigger stages. He clawed his way through local television, learned the brutal economics of the news business the hard way, and eventually found himself at NBC, where he would spend the better part of his professional life helping define what American journalism could look like at its very best. He anchored the Today Show in the 1970s, moved to NBC Nightly News, and became one of the three titans of the evening news era alongside Peter Jennings and Dan Rather. Together, those three men were the news for a generation of Americans. Not a channel. Not a platform. The news. Full stop. What Brokaw represented was authority built on trust, and trust built on an almost inhuman level of consistency. He was present for the moments that defined the last half of the 20th century. He was in Berlin when the wall came down and understood immediately that he was watching history fold over itself. He covered the Oklahoma City bombing, September 11th, and the slow, grinding tectonic shifts of American political life across multiple decades and multiple administrations. He did all of it with a composure that felt less like detachment and more like deep, practiced clarity. Tom Brokaw knew that the anchor's job was not to feel the news for the audience, but to give the audience the space and the information they needed to feel it themselves. That philosophy shaped everything about how he worked. But the world changed. It changed in ways that even someone as perceptive as Brokaw could not have fully anticipated. The internet arrived and tore open the gates that had previously kept the news in the hands of a relatively small number of gatekeepers. Suddenly, everyone had a platform. Suddenly, the evening broadcast was competing with 1 billion individual voices, each one insisting that it had the real story. The 24-hour news cycle demolished the rhythm that had governed broadcast journalism for decades. The idea of waiting for the 6 o'clock news became almost quaint, a relic from an era when people still got their milk delivered to the door. Tom Brokaw stepped back from the anchor desk in 2004, and in the years that followed, he watched the industry he had given his life to navigate a transformation that was as disorienting as it was inevitable. And then there was Savannah Guthrie. If Tom Brokaw was the architecture of a certain era of American journalism, Savannah Guthrie is the living proof that architecture can be reimagined without losing its purpose. She came into the profession through an unusual door. She was a trained lawyer, a litigator who had studied at Georgetown University Law Center and worked as an attorney before journalism claimed her completely. That legal background is not a footnote in her biography. It is the engine underneath everything she does on air. When Savannah Guthrie sits across from a politician or a public figure and begins asking questions, she is not winging it. She has done the work. She has read the briefs, identified the inconsistencies, and built a line of questioning the way a prosecutor builds a case, methodically, patiently, and with the clear intention of getting to something true. She joined NBC News in 2007 and made an immediate impression covering the White House and the Justice Department. She had the rare ability to translate genuinely complex legal and political information into language that a wide audience could absorb without feeling talked down to. That skill is harder than it sounds. Most people who understand the law deeply have tremendous difficulty explaining it simply. Most people who can explain things simply have not done the deep work required to truly understand them. Savannah Guthrie somehow managed to occupy both spaces at once, and that dual fluency became her signature. When she joined the Today Show in 2011, she entered one of the most watched and most scrutinized stages in American television. Morning television is a unique beast. It is not the evening news, with its gravity and its explicit permission to be serious. It is not late night, with its license to be irreverent. Morning television has to be everything simultaneously. It has to be warm and funny and light, and then pivot without warning to something genuinely serious and treat that seriousness with the weight it deserves, and then pivot again to a cooking segment or a celebrity interview, all before most people have finished their first cup of coffee. It is a format that chews through talent at a remarkable rate. People who are brilliant in other contexts frequently discover that morning television is not their natural habitat. Savannah Guthrie discovered the opposite. She was made for it. The real test came in December 2017, when Matt Lauer was abruptly fired from NBC following multiple allegations of sexual misconduct. The Today Show had been built significantly around Lauer's presence over the course of 2 decades. His departure was not just a personnel change. It was a structural earthquake. Cameras were rolling. The audience was watching. And Savannah Guthrie sat at that desk and did something that very few journalists of any generation would have been willing or able to do. She spoke honestly about the confusion and the grief and the disorientation of the moment, not as a performance, but as a genuine human being processing something painful in real time, in public, on live television. It was one of the most remarkable moments in the history of the program, and it told you everything you needed to know about who Savannah Guthrie really is. Tom Brokaw was watching. You can be certain of that. Because Tom Brokaw is the kind of man who pays attention to moments like that, who understands that character reveals itself not during the easy days but during the days when everything is coming apart and someone has to hold the room together. He watched Savannah hold that room. He watched her do it again and again in the years that followed, through a media landscape that grew more hostile and more fractured with every passing season. He watched her handle interviews that required genuine courage, press conferences that required rapid and sophisticated thinking, and morning segments that required her to be fully present and fully human even on the days when being either of those things must have been genuinely difficult. There is something else that connects Tom Brokaw to Savannah Guthrie beyond professional admiration, and it is something that does not get discussed enough. Both of them have faced serious personal health challenges that forced them to confront their own vulnerability in public ways. Brokaw was diagnosed with multiple myeloma in 2013, a blood cancer that he described with characteristic directness and without self-pity. He wrote about it, spoke about it, and refused to let the diagnosis become either a death sentence or a sympathy play. He kept working, kept thinking, kept engaging with the world. Savannah faced her own frightening medical ordeal when she suffered a serious eye injury caused by an accident with her young son. The injury threatened her vision and required multiple surgeries. She was open about the fear and the uncertainty and the long road back. She came back to the desk wearing glasses and was completely transparent about what had happened, because that is who she is. That shared experience of confronting real fragility while the public watches is a bond that transcends the usual mentor and successor narrative. Tom Brokaw does not look at Savannah Guthrie and see a younger version of himself. He looks at her and sees someone who has built something genuinely new using tools that did not exist when he was doing the work. He sees someone who has had to figure out how to be authentic and authoritative in a media environment that punishes both inauthenticity and excessive authority. He sees someone who gets up every morning and does an extraordinarily difficult job with grace, intelligence, and a warmth that is entirely real and entirely her own. At 86, Tom Brokaw has earned the right to say whatever he wants about the state of American journalism. He has paid his dues 100 times over. He has given the business more than most people give anything. And what he has chosen to say, finally and publicly, is that Savannah Guthrie is the real thing. Not a television personality. Not a brand. Not a placeholder. A real journalist with real skills and real substance who has earned her place in a tradition that Brokaw himself helped define. That is not a small thing coming from a man who rarely says anything that isn't carefully considered. It is, in fact, about as significant an endorsement as the world of broadcast journalism has to offer. The torch does not pass in one dramatic moment. It passes gradually, through 1,000 small acts of courage and professionalism and showing up. Tom Brokaw spent his career showing up. Savannah Guthrie has spent hers doing the same. And now, at 86, the man who helped build the house has looked at the woman currently keeping it standing and said, clearly and without reservation, that she is exactly where she belongs.